This talk I've been very much looking forward to it because I've known of Prasoon for maybe the last 1.5, 2 years, and the work that he's been doing. And so as soon as I found out about his work, I sent him an email. Prasoon is based in Singapore, and I said, we'd love to invite you here to talk, and I'd love to also work with you. And then we've been in touch over email, Facebook, and I've been seeing the kind of amazing work that billionBricks is doing. And so it's really great that he could be here. He wrote to me actually saying that he's coming for TEDx. He was here yesterday at the TEDx talks in Pune. And so he's here today. I'll briefly introduce you to Prasoon from what I understand, and then we'll take it from there. Prasoon is an architect. He studied in India and in the US, and then worked all over the world, Southeast Asia, US, and finally settled in Singapore, where his wife is also an architect. And inspiration struck, and he decided to sort of take another road, which he'll speak about. And he started this non-profit design build studio called billionBricks, which has been creating not just one-of-a-kind products, but also customized design solutions for different solutions like schools, working in rural contexts, working on entire villages. We'll talk about it, and creating products that directly try to address the issue of homelessness. So the products are under this brand name called Hide. So there's a weather hide, which is a insulated, weatherproof tent. It's at the bottom end of the spectrum for like the most difficult situations. And then Power Hide, which is a new product that they've come up with. I'm not going to speak much more. Prasoon, thanks so much for coming. It's really a pleasure to have you here. We're going to do this. Prasoon is going to speak, and then I'm going to have a Q&A with him, and for moderated Q&A. And thanks.
All right, thank you so much for having me here, and my apologies again for being so late. And thanks for coming on Sunday morning. And I wrote to Khushru saying that this is actually, I've been doing this work for 4 years now, and I speak often in Singapore, Southeast Asia, United States, but this is the first time I'm speaking in India. It has taken me 4 years to get an invitation to speak in India. And I've also very rarely spoken about architecture. So when he told me that his is an architecture studio, a lot of students will be coming. So I had to kind of rethink about architecture, because I've been speaking more about entrepreneurship, more about how do you create a non-profit business, if there's a terminology like that, because that I think is more critical than a lot of the work that we do. Because a lot of things that I'm going to speak about today is something somewhere inherently all of us want to do, but we don't often find opportunities. And I had a moment where I was like, unless I'll do it, I'll never know if it's possible to do or not. So I'll speak a little bit about what inspired me to start billionBricks, some of the work we are doing, and I've kind of framed my talk, and because also Khushru mentioned a lot of students come for this talk, against some of the critique I have about how architects look at architecture, and especially when we are working with the poor. So I want to talk about how billionBricks is trying to do those things differently, and how we are questioning the status quo which exists, because that really is a reason for a lot of issues which continue to plague us but haven't been resolved, right? And I've seen it myself, that when I studied architecture and when I did my thesis, the kind of work I did that time, I was influenced by a lot of other theses which had been done 10 years before me. And now that I look at students' work, I still find it the same ideologies, the same principles being used, but we as people and humanity have changed so much, but architecture hasn't evolved. So those are certain things that billionBricks is trying to change, and I also have to keep myself a little bit young at mind to make sure that I can deliver for the future. So my work, professional work, I worked in the commercial design industry for about 10 years. Started in India, very typical, worked for 2 years for a studio in Delhi, moved to United States for masters, and worked for a couple of years in the United States, and decided to move to Asia. High-rise towers, master planning work, urban design work, so a spectrum of work. But I think one of the key changes for me was when I moved to the United States. I was working on a lot of regional planning stuff, right? A lot of projects which were related to what are termed as transit-oriented developments. And very soon, I started to feel that it's a country which is so developed. So what am I doing contributing to a developed country to take it to the next level, right? And I also found United States, a lot of architecture to be very ugly. So I was like, okay, so is this really what I studied for? And is this where I want to contribute to? And it was also a very interesting moment. This was about, I think, in 2005. For the first time, foreign firms were starting to come into India and started to work on very large projects. And so the architecture industry in India was changing. And I looked at as an opportunity to use my skills to contribute to where I had actually grown rather than to somewhere else. So very soon I moved to Hong Kong. So I worked in the United States only for about 2.5, 3 years maybe. And I moved to Hong Kong with an American firm called HOK. Some of you may have heard their name. And we were doing a lot of work while I was at HOK in India and across Southeast Asia. So that really was what I wanted to do. I wanted to work in big cities which were growing, wanted to contribute through my skills to make sure that we don't do the kind of mistakes development has done in other cities, and can I, through my work, try and improve them. So these were some of the kind of projects. This was in Philippines I was working on, very typical. I mean, that time I loved it. Now I find it like there was really hardly any creativity. I worked on the Mumbai airport project quite extensively for a couple of years. And then in 2008, I think, or 2007, some of you might know that there was a major international competition to redevelop Dharavi. So Dharavi had been split into 5 pieces of land by SRA in Mumbai. And they had invited bids from international developer consortiums to develop those 5 pieces of Dharavi. So I had done one of the proposals as part of HOK at that time, which kind of opened my eyes towards how development is essential. There are a lot of opportunities, but we tend to miss them in trying to balance too much. Because we always want, especially as developers, we want commercial interests to be worked out. We are concerned about slum dwellers. We are concerned about environmental issues. But what we don't realize is, as human beings, it's very difficult to balance all these things together. And as a result, often the solutions that come out are kind of trying to balance these things rather than being focused on one particular principle. And I'll talk more in details as to how billionBricks tries to look at things from a very narrow focus, because we really want to make an impact as powerful as possible to the cause that we have committed ourselves to. So I went in 2009 to a conference. For the first time, I went to a conference which was on affordable housing to present the proposal for Dharavi. This was in Philippines, the conference, and a 3-day-long conference. And I was shocked to see there were all the global experts on affordable housing, and everybody talked for all the 3 days about issues related to land and finance as the primary roadblock to why affordable housing does not get built. And those are good issues to speak about, but what I found missing in the whole dialogue was there was no conversation except the one which I spoke about design or sustainability, which means design really was not part of the conversation, while all of us know for housing how important is it for us to know our customers and what we are designing for them. So I found that both strange, but also I looked at as an opportunity where there was a space me as a designer and architect could work in and contribute to, because nobody else was doing it, right? So that was an idea that I had. So in 2009, I came back from the conference. I joined a new architecture practice in Singapore called Space Matrix. It was interiors practice. They just started a studio in doing an architecture work, and we're working on a couple of major urban development projects in Gujarat. So they hired me, and the deal that I struck with them at that time was that I'll work in their studio for 4 days a week, and for 2 days I'll do the stuff on affordable housing, which I was passionate about. So that's how I thought I'll be able to balance my commercial work with my passion of doing where it's very difficult to make money. And But as a lot of you would know, once you are in commercial practice, the pressure of commercial practice never gives you those 2 days. So I would spend up doing 6 days, 7 days, traveling all the time, and never would get those 2 days, while I continued to lose my salary for a lot of months for 2 days because I was being paid for 4 days. And it was really bothering me that I'm letting go of money, but I'm still not doing what I say I'm passionate about. And this went on for quite some time, for almost, I would say, 2 years or something. And then I was like, okay, what would it take for me to give these 2 days away and literally sell my soul of not doing what I wanted to do? And interestingly, I actually sat down on an Excel sheet and came up with a financial number. At what price will I sell my soul? And I went to my boss and negotiated, and he agreed to pay me that money. So that's how I sold my 2 days and my passion for what I wanted to do. But it didn't last for too long. In 8 or 9 months, that extra money that I was getting wasn't satisfying enough anymore. So I knew that by money, it's not going to change me. So I had to go back, and these were some of the projects I was working on with developers in Mumbai. And there was one incident where some of the developers asked me to make certain changes to the designs, which would make them go beyond minimum standards. And I was not ready to do it. And that was actually the day when I went to my boss and I said, I need to quit. I didn't want to waste my time in doing something which was wrong and which would not contribute in any way to what I wanted to do. So I decided to quit my job, and my boss was like, no, you have to continue to work with us. So we struck a new deal of working 50% on this work and 50% on what I wanted to do. And that time I had 3 ideas. So I hadn't kind of narrowed down on what space would I work on. But out of the 3, the 2 ideas that I wanted to pursue was, one is what eventually becomes billionBricks, which was affordable housing. The second idea was actually on the education side. So when I quit my job, my boss took me to the CEO of my company and said that Prasoon wants to quit him. How can we keep him back? But the CEO actually told my boss that I don't think Prasoon's going to stay anymore because he's made up his mind and we've had this conversation with him before. But he told me that, Prasoon, you really don't know what you're doing, so why don't you go back and develop your idea more, and then I'll come in and see if I can support it in some way. So I spent about 6 months developing the idea of billionBricks, what it would want to do, and why it would do things differently than others. What's the space that we would operate in? And one of the key things that I wanted to break through in billionBricks was the fact that oftentimes we architects, when we work for the poor, we work in making buildings which are special, right? We want to work with new materials. We want to go in villages. It's very fashionable to go in Africa or Indonesia and build a nice little school. But these are often remain as one-off buildings. And I wanted to build buildings which would scale up to actually address the problem at a massive scale. So the key criteria for me forming billionBricks was the fact that we will not be an organization to say that we'll help poor, but we'll actually be an organization which will say, how can we solve homelessness? So that was a key difference, and it took me quite some time to come up with how billionBricks would do, and I'll talk more about it in just a bit. But that was the moment where I decided to quit, and my CEO liked the whole idea, and then he joined with me as my co-founder in billionBricks. And while this was happening, I was also going around. I was anyways working in a lot of major cities across Southeast Asia. I would go to them, and I look at the fact that migration were big issues. I would travel, and I was very observant. And I look at a lot of times how support was being given to the poorest of the poor by some of the largest companies that you can think of. So when it comes to working for the poor, we are very satisfied often with poor quality solutions. Because poor are not demanding quality from us. We are going and actually giving them something, and we think any help that we give will work for them. So I spent about 4 months just traveling, looking at what others are doing. I found work projects like these. I found projects in Mumbai, you would have seen stuff like this, where often our excuses for buildings for poor is that we don't have land for housing and we don't have money. But here we have land and money, and we build up buildings which are worse than being in slums. And then we go and criticize very often, saying that even if we give buildings to the poor for free, they don't want it. Because this gesture of saying that we need to give and they need to accept is what creates this tension. And I wanted to question these things as to why we are doing this. This was a project in Cambodia being worked by one of the largest NGOs in the world, where if I could actually literally punch this wall, the wall would break. They would go in and build homes, but not infrastructure. This was sewage, water, everywhere. So we are moving people from slums into new development where we have money, where we have access to talent, where we have land, but we provide infrastructure which is still poor. Schools, this was in Mumbai, no lights in schools. And you would find the best, biggest corporates coming every weekend to these schools to do their CSR work. But we accept it. We come back at our homes and say, oh, we did very good this weekend. Because for poor, we always accept anything. Schools where there's no furniture, kids are studying on steps. And these were the things that I wanted to change at billionBricks, saying that we will never, ever provide poor solutions for the poor. That really is the mantra behind billionBricks. When people come and ask me, how much do your homes cost? My answer is always, it's not about cost. It's about what people need and what they want, and am I providing them the best that I can? And these are some of the key principles behind formation of billionBricks. We said it'll be a one-of-a-kind design studio. We'll use design's power to make a difference, but not incremental change, but literally disruptive change. We'll spend a lot of our time, energy, and money in research and development because the solutions don't exist. You go on search on Google for affordable housing, for new buildings being done in poor areas, you'll always find people researching on new materials, sustainable materials. Have you ever seen those materials being used in yours and mine houses? We always want a new solution for the poor. And billionBricks believes in not doing new solutions for the poor, just for the sake of it. The second principle that we have at billionBricks is that the homeless are not our beneficiaries, they are our customers. So we are not helping them. Our gesture is not to go in and help. We are no one to help them. They haven't come to ask for homes also. So we are no one to go and give to them. We need to create solutions which they would want. And if they'll want, then we will give them. So research and development is the first thing. The second is how do we look at the homeless? The third criteria, of course, is that we'll never do poor quality work for the poor. We'll do it with the same ethos that I would do for my commercial clients, with the same design principles, and with the same robustness of design processes that we would do otherwise. So we spent, after I founded billionBricks, I think this was in October of 2013 when I actually started working 100% on billionBricks. And then it took me almost, I would say, about 12 to 15 months to understand what exactly billionBricks would do and how would it actually solve the problem of homelessness if it does, right? And I didn't mention one of the key things was, one of our key principles was that we'll be focused on only one issue, which is housing for the homeless. So we'll not digress into other issues that need solutions. And also, one of the key conversations that we had in the beginning before starting billionBricks was that how would we define the people that we want to help? So we said we will work with the poorest of the poor for whom no help is coming. You find a lot of NGOs, a lot of architects fascinated by what happens in slums. Students going and researching on slums all the time. But we at billionBricks typically don't work in slums. We work with people who can't afford slums. If you know, I mean, you guys are all from India, you would know how much does it cost to stay in a place like Mumbai slum. It's not free. So we work with people who can't afford to be in slums because at least in slums you have a roof over your head. The kids don't know that the land title is not there with their parents. They still go to school. They have a lot of opportunities which people who can't afford slums, who are on the streets, don't have. So we said we'll work with the poorest of the poor. And I think this was a decision which has made me lose more hair than I would have thought. It's much harder to be working with that community. So we said we'll work on 3 areas. And if these 3 areas we can scale up, then there could be a solution to ending homelessness. The first one being disaster displacement. Why homeless are created in the first place, right? In fact, the statistics are quite staggering, that we have more people who are displaced and homeless than any time in the history in the world. And this number is actually increasing so rapidly because of political issues, climate issues, and economic issues. So if we can stem and address the problem of why homeless are being created, then that would be an area for us to address. The second is rural-urban migration, because that's what puts pressure in urban areas. And really solving housing issues in urban areas, in my opinion, is an impossibility. We can keep saying that we can solve it, but land economics will never allow us, in current principles, to solve it. Unless the government comes in with a true heart, and all the people who are responsible for building and financing housing come out with the true heart of saying that all those people who live in slums or in the streets are economic contributors and deserve infrastructure of housing, schools, healthcare, it will never happen. So that is an impossibility in today's scenario. And the third will be, how can we come up eventually, if we've been able to stem the flow of people, to address the urban poverty issues. The second principle that we had was that we will design stuff, and I think I've already mentioned to you, with the homeless as our customers. So we will not value engineer what I've learned in my 10 years of professional career and make it affordable for the homeless, but I'll start new solutions from bottom up for the poorest of the poor. And the last is to overcome dependencies. Right? One of the key things in the nonprofit sector or in social development is that you need to depend on a lot of other agents. You need to depend on financing institutions, you need to depend on governments, you need to depend on other NGOs, you need to depend on other infrastructure agencies. If you need to build a house, you need electricity, you need water. There's so many dependencies that you have that it makes it almost impossible. Today I came 50 minutes late because I had to depend on another car driver to make sure I can come here on time. These dependencies slow us down all the time, and we don't have control on them. So how can we use design as a way to overcome these dependencies and try and reach to our customers to make sure that the problem is addressed? And that's where I think has taken me probably the most amount of time as to how can we come up with very creative new business models on which our design solutions can actually sit. So eventually we came up with a process of how we would operate. The first piece of the process is what we call as urban crossover. This is like a research and strategy arm of billionBricks, if I can say, where before we take up any project or any idea, we spend a lot of time and energy in exploring whether it's worth spending our time, energy, and money into it. We only take up ideas which we think will scale up to at least address 1 million lives. So if it's a project which is a one-off school, a one-off house, or a one-off complex, which does not have a systemic solution for replication, then we will not do it. So scale is critical for us, and we need to be able to identify whether it will have an economic model that can make it sustainable. So this is where a lot of business strategy happens when we start on a project. And we have, I think today we have probably 5 to 7 different ideas which are in urban crossover, which we keep deliberating on, keep working on, to see which are the ideas that we want to take to what we call as the step number 2, which is the design studio, which is really the core and heart of our work. So design studio is where once an idea we've identified is something we would want to invest in, goes from urban crossover to the studio. And that's where we start to ideate and do very pure architecture and design work, which all of us are very familiar with. We ensure that our design ideas actually go from being nice renders and get prototyped. That's a very key matrix for us. If I can't take an idea from sketch to prototype, then my board considers its failure and waste of time and money. One of the most fashionable things today, if you search on Google, is transitional housing for refugees. You'll find at least 10,000 different ideas worked by students, companies in the world, beautiful renderings on Google. But they never get translated. There's so much of information, there's so much of knowledge, ideas out there, but to actually translate them into something buildable is very difficult. And we don't want billionBricks to be an ideas institution. So for us, prototyping is very critical. And if we understand that the prototype is working, what we took as premise for our business model for our ideas and for our impact is working, then we take it to the last level, what is called as productization and scale. So our belief is that in order to achieve that scale of reaching out to at least 1 million, we need to be able to productize our solutions. I don't know if this is the right approach or wrong approach, but this is something we are still very new in. We have productized one product, which Kushru mentioned about the tents, and we are very close to productizing a second product as we move forward. And then how do we productize them? Because productization, what it does is that it gives you scale, it gives you cost efficiencies, and then it gives you incredible reach. And because everything that we do as a nonprofit is open source, it allows others to take our designs and adapt and build on them on their own. So for billionBricks Studio, I approached, some of you may have heard of Architecture Bureau in Mumbai. So one of my key things when I started billionBricks was that I'll not do design. Because design requires so much of personal involvement. It's so emotional that if I start doing design, I'll never be able to fundraise. I'll never be able to think of the business side of the organization. And as a nonprofit, fundraising is a very critical issue. Right? In a normal practice, a design practice or any service, you provide a service and you get money. In a nonprofit, you provide a service, you don't get money. You need a second source of money. So you have less resources, but you need to do double the amount of work. So I had to spend my time on finding money, and I partnered with Architecture Bureau to establish what we call as the billionBricks Studio, to make sure that the design is handled by them. So we said that we will productize our solutions between the range of $100 to $10,000. That's the benchmark as of today. I mean, it may change in future. And we will try and come up with solutions in between. So when I said we have got about 6 or 7 ideas in the urban crossover stage, they all sit somewhere in the spectrum. Weatherhide is the tent, which my vision was would be our $100 product, is the closest to being productized. And the reason we started with that, because it's the simplest, it's the most cheapest, and it's easiest for us to see whether the model works or not. So in our 4 years since we started, we worked quite extensively in the region. We are headquartered in Singapore. We've got an office with Architecture Bureau in Mumbai. We've got team members based in Delhi, Bangalore, a village we are working in Karnataka called Kanchur, one based in Los Angeles, Sweden, and Manila. So we have quite an extensive reach with our work. Most of our work focus is actually India, but I picked up quite a bit of work in the region in Malaysia, Indonesia, Cambodia, is because it kind of tends to move faster. India is quite a difficult place to work, and for me to prove that I can actually deliver, most of the work has been delivered outside of India. So in our 3 years, this is a little old now, so we worked in 5 countries, 2 products already. We've helped about actually more than 2,000 now, and we've raised more than $1.5 million in funding to keep us alive. This is our team as of today. We have quite a formidable board of advisors as well. We've got some trustees and team members. Actually, our team's now grown to more than 8 people. And then we've got a lot of corporate partners who come in and take care of a lot of our costs. So for example, all our infrastructure for software, laptops, financial accounting and stuff is taken care by corporates. So I want to get into 4 reasons on the subject of why I think very often we design poorly for the poor, and why in those 4 areas how billionBricks is trying to approach it differently. The first is that we always want to experiment with our new ideas on the poor. You go to your commercial client and they're asking you to build a mall or shopping mall. You'll never experiment with a new building material. You'll never experiment with things like sustainable bottles. And why? Because it's not something which is tested long enough to know how effectively would it work. The criteria when we are working with our commercial clients is so focused and driven to make sure that in the budget and time we can deliver the project. Because time is money. We want materials which are fast, we want materials which are tested, and we don't want to experiment on new stuff. A lot of times people come to me, especially from universities, who want students to work on our projects. And I'm like, why do you come to me? When I was in the commercial practice, you would never send students to go to our sites and work. Will my commercial client ever allow a student to go and start building? But with poor, we don't mind. We use them as a grounds for learning all the time. And I have no aversion to it. I think learning is an important process. But we have to understand that where can people who are not skilled can contribute and where they can't. And poor for me are my clients and customers. So we are very careful when we do stuff which is untested. Architects are very fascinated by shipping containers, right? And I'm also an architect, so I as well. And I gave into working with shipping containers on one of our first projects because it kind of comes in, even though I didn't want to experiment, but it's just so cool. And everybody would ask, so what have you worked with shipping containers? You build homes with shipping containers, right? Have you ever seen rich people living in shipping containers? Has anybody gone inside a shipping container ever? It's so tight. It's made out of steel. It's so hot. When it rains, it's so noisy. It's not livable. But we love the idea of using shipping containers to make people live inside them. You'll find hundreds of examples on Google of the poor housing being made out of these shipping containers. And I loved it too. And I found a client who gave me, I don't know, some 9 shipping containers, so you use them for your project. So we went in and worked out how we can make it usable, but not make people live inside. So this was a project, I think this was the second project that we started on in Malaysia. This was a school for children which are stateless. So in Malaysia, there are about 50,000 children that are stateless. Their parents moved from like Philippines and Indonesia to work in plantations, and very deep inside plantations, and Malaysia doesn't recognize them as valid students which can have access to education. So this was a part of project where 30 schools would be built over the next 10 years, and this would be the first test prototype school which will be built. The site was next to a river, which floods every couple of years. So we used the shipping containers as stilts or as an exposed foundation, and then we built the building on top of it. So we didn't use the containers for habitation purposes. We only used it for storage and for as an exposed foundation. So instead of building stilts, and we could actually reduce the cost of the building by about 40% because we didn't have to build any foundation for this. This is how we envision the school. The school is actually opening this month on the 13th, so in a couple of days. The school's getting finished now. The whole upstairs part is made out of wood. We found some, Malaysia finding wood is not hard. And we found it with the contractor had a lot of this wood which could be recycled and had been lying there. And then we used things like reed beds to clean the sewage water. We made orientation of the building such that you could eventually in future put solar panels on them. But we tried to ensure that the building can run efficiently without having a need for any electricity. We also excavated, I think this image is not showing very clearly here, but we excavated to create a pond for retaining water. And then we used that as one side to prop the building. So this was a couple of weeks ago, building getting built. This is the latest, I think, maybe from 4 weeks ago. So this was the mound that we created from the soil that we excavated on one of the sites. And this is also from, I think, 3 weeks ago. And we've also been planting a lot of banana trees across the site. And now we are actually preparing a vegetable garden as well, because a lot of parents also get involved with the school. And school doesn't have like a canteen, so parents will come and they'll set up like small shops within the school premise to sell food to the kids as well. So about, I think, 240 students will study in 2 shifts every day, so about 120 per shift. And if this is successful, then this will be built, 30 such schools will be built across Malaysia. The second point I want to talk about is the recognition part, right? So before I started billionBricks, I had never spoken in a forum like this. So what did I do different? How come my architecture changed from being unrecognizable to something where people want to listen to me? And this, I think, is a huge problem, because anybody who is doing different work, people don't ask, are you doing good enough work or are you not? If I tell people I'm building homes for the homeless, they say, oh, you must be doing great. But they haven't asked me whether I'm actually doing good work or not. In my 4 years of starting billionBricks, I've never had to show my portfolio to anyone. Prior to that, we would pitch to clients for months and months, keep doing free designs to make sure we can get a project. They would want to make sure that we have the skill and ability to deliver a project. But in this field, there's no competition for us. And hence recognition is very easy. And this project I want to talk about here is the tent weather ride. So if you would know, in 2013, there was an incident in Muzaffarnagar where communal riots have happened. These were the worst riots that India had seen, communal riots, since independence. 50,000 people had been rendered homeless, and they had been forced to live in fields outside their towns and villages. This happened, I think, maybe in August or July of 2017, 2013, if I remember correctly. And then they were living there. This is an actual photograph from that camp. And then winters came, and about 30 children died because of nothing but cold. This is 21st century India, where we can't protect our kids from something as trivial as cold. You go and search on Google, you'll find hundreds of media articles as to how can kids die in those conditions. What did the government do? What did the other NGOs that were working there did? They gave a call for action to send either money, blankets, and warm clothes. And I was shocked that my parents themselves have been giving warm clothes for the last 30 years to help the poor, and we continue to give that for the next 30 years as well. Nobody will ever come to think of how can we break the cycle of every winter, people needing warm clothes, of us not giving warm clothes. How have our lives changed in the last 30 years? But for the poor, our giving hasn't changed. And we don't realize that in these conditions of moisture, temperature, wind, rain, warm clothes don't work. Imagine wearing a sweater in a rainy condition. When our body parts are exposed like this, hypothermia occurs. We need to protect ourselves when the temperatures go down below 10 degrees centigrade. And I wrote to governments, I wrote to NGOs, they didn't even know what to ask for. So billionBricks team spent about 6 months traveling across India and looking at how people live in these conditions in winters and in summers. And we came up with this idea of a tent which would work on the principle of trapping a family's body heat. Because you need to protect each part of your body to make sure that hypothermia doesn't occur. The other alternative for this is sleeping bags. But sleeping bags don't work if a mother's got a small little kid. If she's pregnant, if you've gone around places like Delhi, because I can think of Delhi, you'll find women bathing on the streets. They've got no privacy, no dignity. They feed kids on the street. Blankets don't protect from these things. So we need to think beyond what can be done. So we designed this tent for a family of 5, so 2 adults and 3 children, which works on the principle of trapping a family's body heat to keep them warm in winters. So it's insulated like a sleeping bag, but inside it's got a reflective material which reflects your body heat back onto you. So as temperatures outside go down, there's not only a thermal barrier which insulates the temperature inside, but the inside temperature also increases by about 1 degree centigrade per hour. It's the only tent in the world which you can reverse in summers to reflect the heat out. So when I first designed the tent, I never designed it for summers. But the research showed that in a lot of places in India, more people die in summers than in winters. In fact, just in a city like Delhi, almost 3,000 to 4,000 deaths occur every year, and this has been consistent for the last 10 years. This is how it looks on the inside. The structure is made out of plumbing pipes, so you can just buy it off the shelf from anywhere. And these joints that you see are 3D printed. So in 2015, I finished the first couple of prototypes. In 2014, I finished the first prototypes. And then in 2015, I manufactured about 30 of them to take the prototypes to what is called a proof of concept to see whether it works, begins to work at scale or not. So we gave about, I think, 12 to 13 in Delhi and about 2 in Bombay to see how does it perform in different climate. And people used it for about 7 months. So we gave them in end of December, and then we tested them till July. So we tested in summers, in rain, and winter, of course. And then I put a few videos of weather hides online. And within a few days, we had hit. Yeah.
Once you're on this, can you just explain how you care about the ventilation part?
Yeah.
There's a lot
So
of oxygen,
yeah.
carbon dioxide.
So what we did was that we actually created 2 ventilators, which you can't close. So so the CO2 deposition inside will not lead to any critical medical issues.
Another one, fire industry.
So this is not fire insulated, yeah. It's not. It's just like your tarpaulin, right? So people when they
Inside.
sorry,
You have to cook or do something fire activity outside.
absolutely, yeah, yeah. Actually, there are no tents in the world which are fireproof. So we put some stories out there, and within a few weeks, we hit some 40 million views on our videos. We had about 5,000 emails in my inbox, people asking for these solutions, and we had a lot of Hollywood celebrities writing, tweeting about it. And this is what happens when you do non-profit work with the poor. If I would have built 15 homes in my 3 years of professional career, I would have been fired from my job. But here, 15 homes for the poor are being celebrated because we have no competition. Nobody else is doing what we are doing. Are weather hides the best solution for the homeless? Of course not, right? But that's the only solution. So there's no benchmark. The competition we have is zero, and hence it gets celebrated. And what does it do? This celebration, it kills innovation, right? Because you are a monopoly. You have no competition, so you don't have no desire to improve. You become arrogant. You've seen so many of corporations which do it. Kodak, they kill themselves because they never evolved while they were the largest photo company in the world. So weatherhide hasn't evolved as a solution in last 18 months. But if we had more competition, we would have probably had a need to run faster. So I think easy recognition is a huge dilemma in our industry. But what this did for us was open new avenues which I'd never thought it will do. So if you've heard of the story of Tesla, they came up recently with this $30,000 model, right? This is what Elon Musk calls as the mass model at $30,000. But one of the things he spoke when he released this $30,000 model is that it takes technology, at least 3 versions, to make it suitable for mass production. So you always design something for the high-end market, and you keep value engineering it, improving it, bring the cost down, not necessarily by value engineering, but by scale as well. And it becomes a mass product, and it takes time and money and energy. But what the weatherhide showed is that we designed something for the homeless, but we started receiving requests from US and Europe from people who wanted to use it for camping. So it shifted the whole principle, the notion that we have that we always have to value engineer for the poor. It turned the whole thing around by saying that if you design something not poorly for the poor, the rich would want it as well. In fact, I've had so many conversations with people when they look at the real weatherhide, they tell me, why don't you design a cheaper version for the poor? Because it's so high quality. But it shows that if you want to question the status quo, it can be done. And what we did, and I think this slide's not showing it well, is that we set up a website called weatherhide.org and weatherhide.com, where it's now sold for commercial use. And what we've done is that we've flipped the model of how help is given to the poor, where we've empowered now the poor to get access to it on its own. I think I told you in the beginning that my vision for weatherhide was that this would be the $100 home. Today it costs $200 in the market, including shipping costs, deployment costs, and everything. And we've had homeless people who come on our website, who write to me on Facebook, and they purchase it online. And nobody believes it. It empowers the homeless to come in and buy a shelter for themselves rather than depend on an NGO to come in and give it to them. And what they are doing now in the US, that the homeless are actually fundraising on street corners for the $200 that it costs for me to ship it to them. In India, we've set up a sales team in Delhi and Mumbai, which is going deep into homeless communities and selling them just like they sell cigarettes and anything else. And people are buying it for $30, $40. So we are having to cross-subsidize, but the idea is that eventually this should cost not more than $100. And the reason I came up with the idea of $100 is if any of you have come from Delhi, you would know a whole mafia exists for renting blankets in winters. They rent out blankets every night for about $1 to a family of 5. 2 blankets, one for the floor and one for yourself. Winters are 120 days. If they were to give that $1 a day, not to the mafia, to me, I can sell this to them for $100. It will last for at least 2 years, 2.5 years. It's much better than a blanket. It gives dignity to women, and they have this sense of pride of having their first home. So once we have the scale, we'll be able to probably take it to $100. So today it costs $200. We are selling it in retail for about $300 plus shipping. We are now getting into places like Amazon and all, where we are selling it online. And we'll see how it goes. So it's right now in the production cycle of the first 500, which are being shipped to US, Europe, Singapore, and India, 4 locations. The third thing I want to talk about is that the poor are not our beneficiary. I think I've already mentioned a few times, but we always think that we need to go in and help somebody. Have we ever seen a poor come to us and say, we need help? I'm poor, I need my income to be increased. So we came up with this idea of a home called Power Height. And this idea emerged when I was working in this village called Konchur, which is, I think, about from Pune is maybe about 10 hours by train. It's a small village at 3,000 population. And you go into that village, it feels like you've come into 1970s Bollywood movie. It has nothing in terms of what has changed since that time, except that people have access to cell phones and dish antennas. So I was working there, and I met with a few bureaucrats. And then in 2015, I was very excited when the Prime Minister of India said that he wants to end homelessness in India. No one ever in the world has the audacity to say that they want to house more than 200 million people in 5 years. The Prime Minister of India wants to build 40 million homes in rural India in 5 years, 20 million homes in urban areas in 5 years. It's just incredible. But how will we do it with our current level of infrastructure and thinking? They set aside money that the families could take so they can build their homes. But there are systems not in place to give that money to families. I met with bureaucrats. They said, Prasoon, I have money, but I don't know how and who to give it to. So we did a project at billionBricks in the urban crossover realm for about 6 months, where we got housing experts from all over the world and brainstormed with us for 6 months that how can Prime Minister's vision be realized of building 40 million homes. And one of the key findings from that research was the fact that even if these homes get built, one is this is an impossibility. It comes to about 8 million or 7.2 million homes a year. China, at its peak of development, was building about 1.1 to 1.3 million homes. We are not even close to the way China can build. How can we scale to 7 million homes a year? But even if we assume that it gets built, it will require 300% increase in power demand in India. Billions of dollars of investment will need to go into so much of other infrastructure which we haven't even imagined. So we may end up building homes, but we may end up creating an externality for which we'll need another set of solutions to be done. So can we think of something which is more sustainable and which can club this problem of home financing and not creating externality? And that's how the idea of Power Height emerged, where we said, can we combine the housing demand of 40 million homes and the energy demand into a single solution which generates energy not only for itself, but to sell it to finance the house. So this is how the first versions of PowerHide looked. This is the new current version, which we are now building in 6 locations across the world. And the principle, like I said, is very simple. It generates about 4 times the amount of energy that the house needs for itself. 3x energy is sold to finance the cost of the house. In about 8 to 12 years, the house is free. So a homeless person who can't afford anything today can actually go in, get this house, and in 12 years return. The solar cells last for 20, 22 years, so it actually starts to generate passive income for them. You and I live in urban areas. We invest in property because property is an asset for us. Because we reap the benefits of land price increases in our properties, and we can flip them to make more money. This is an opportunity which does not exist for the poor. So PowerHide now makes properties for the poor also an asset against which they can take loans, against which we can reach to more poorer populations, because they know, banks now know that there's a financing mechanism built and they don't have to depend on the people themselves. We designed it such that 30% of PowerHide is factory built, just like how your car chassis is built, using completely robotics, because a huge issue in construction is the quality of construction. How would we train people to build 40 million homes which are safe, where the concrete is done well, where it will not break when an earthquake occurs? So 30% of PowerHide is factory built, and the rest is built on site to make sure it doesn't end up being the same product being stamped all across India. We can contextualize it by material, by environment, by aesthetics, and by topography, depending on what the need may be. I think this I don't need to go in, but it can be vertically expanded or horizontally as well. It collects rainwater, has an IoT. I don't think this one shows. Has an IoT system inbuilt to monitor how well is it performing. And so Contour is one of the places where we'll be building some of the first prototypes. Then we are working on sites in Sri Lanka, Philippines, and Sweden to start building the 6 prototypes that we want to build. We've also come up with a version of PowerHide, which is a high-end version, where you can buy a home and give a home, similar to what we're trying to do with weather-hide tents as well. The last thing I want to talk about, and this is my favorite subject, is the pressure for perfection. So one of the key things when I started the organization was that I'll be able to keep the costs low for billionBricks, because we are a non-profit, by keeping our processes as lean as possible, right? So I can save cost on human resource. But the moment I started billionBricks, people started asking me, so are you doing community participation for your designs? I'd never done it when I was an architect. For my high-rise towers, I never did community participation. That was not part of my cost, my fee. And now, all of a sudden, I need to add a new process while I'm trying to cut down on costs? My skill is not community participation. My skill is design and architecture. So how do I do this new process? So I went to Contour. People started asking me, do you use local materials for your construction? Not only experimentation, but local materials. Because we are fascinated, we are told in architecture school all the time, use local materials. How many of our homes are built with local materials? How many of our high-rise towers and shopping malls are built by local materials? While they cover 40,000, 400,000 square feet of area, but these 25 square meter homes is what we want to be made in local materials. And just like my shipping containers, I fell in this trap of building by local materials when we went into this village. We had to build 150 toilets as part of a project by using local materials. But it took us more than 1.5 years to build those toilets because the local material availability is so low. So what is more important? That people get toilets first, or they get toilets after 1.5 years? So we try and confuse and burden ourselves with so many things in architecture that it avoids creating the impact which is essential. for us, and I mean, this is very personal. For me, the impact is to make sure that the poor have home as fast as possible. Every day they are dying on the streets. And this may be the right approach, but it's not a scalable approach. And this burdens me day in and day out by trying to work through these things. The other thing people ask me, are you involving the community in construction? What is their sweat equity in it? But are they skilled to build homes? How can we expect anybody to go in and start building homes? I want to build professional, high-quality homes for them. How can I expect an unskilled person to come in and start putting their skills in it? They have their jobs. So we try and add another layer. And it's not only that they can't build it, even if they have the skill, it takes a lot of time, energy, and money to get people involved to build it. You need to create new partnerships with contractors to make sure that they'll involve these people. What if they don't show up? What if they can only work on Saturday, Sunday? There's so many underlying issues which cut down on efficiencies each time we burden ourselves with these other aspects, which I never faced in my commercial practice. And hence, I can build shopping malls much faster than 150 toilets, which are such tiny things to be built. And then this thing I just love, this idea of then people asking me, so what happens after the homes? What do you do about education of the kids? What do you do about employment? What if your site doesn't have water? I don't know. That's government's job, right? The Prime Minister of India has got a Ministry of Education, Human Resource, Housing, Water, Electricity, Power. He's not able to do it. And I, as an individual with a tiny organization, need to solve all these aspects. And I've seen each time I work with other collaborators, when we hire people as well, we've been trained to think like this, that when we do work with the poor, we want to solve the problems of the poor, we need to look at holistic solutions, which is a good thing, but the solutions never come. Because if there were holistic solutions, I'm sure some smart people in the world would have found them by now. Or somebody needs to invest time and money in able to find it. billionBricks' vision is to make sure that everyone has a home. Everyone has a roof over their head. They don't die if it's cold. Their kids have a safe place to go. Women don't feel ashamed being on the streets. My vision is not to provide jobs. I don't care if they are unemployed in their homes. That somebody else needs to solve it. And I'm sure they'll be able to solve it. And that's a huge issue which avoids organizations like us to scale, because we keep burdening ourselves with things like this. So this was a project in Cambodia where we tried to involve all these principles in place. And we built 48 homes. I think now it's about 60. So this has been our biggest project. So I want to end by saying that billionBricks has been founded to question the status quo at many different levels, what I learned in the school. It has been taught by me based on what I learned in my commercial practices and what was good and bad in it. But it has a very singular focus, which is to end homelessness. And we believe that the current mindset and our belief system is avoiding us from solving the challenges that we have. And we as architects often think that we have the ability to solve a lot more than what we can actually do. Thank you so much.